Hello again, guys. It is I, Freeze700, and here is Chapter 4 of Valiant, Salvor, Hunger and Pain. Before we go on and continue, just know that since it has been a while and I've been spending most of my time writing this out, I did forget exactly the correct inputs and edits that I did to make my voices. So if the character voices that you have grown accustomed to sound slightly different, that is my bad entirely, and if you do not like this video because of that, I totally understand and accept that. But without further ado, let us continue and adapt, much like Endura shall. So, here we go. The boys breathed hard, their muscles giving into fatigue, barely dragging themselves onwards. Their mentor had them brawling against each other, sowing hatred and division amongst the youth. But after 3 hours of non-stop fighting, wrestling, and a few killings, the mentor decided now is the time for running. For the past 5 hours, the boys ran in laps around the dark-lit bronze room, their naked feet slapping the hard metal floor as they ran their bodies around the room. Endura and Jorg being the only two in the group still able to muster some semblance of jogging. The others barely able to make a walk. Their breathing hard, some coughing as their lungs felt like ice was trapped in their chest. Endura was able to have the energy as he kept thinking of his tribe, of his father, of the weakness these two represent. This hate was fueling his body, giving him the only sustenance he needed in order to continue running. Jorg, being one of the fittest boys of the village, this run was straining on his body and physique. But the more important reason why he's still running is that he fought the least out of all the boys, barely having a bruise as he was considered by the other boys one of the stronger kids. Whenever one would attack Jorg, all he would do is resist, and the boy would seek a new target, one who is weaker. The boys originally came thin or with a slight pudge, their faces full and healthy. Now, after vigorous workout of fighting with running, their bodies now had obvious signs of starvation, their cheeks thin, able to see the cheekbones below, their ribs visible and higher elevated than their stomachs. Those who came with a little pudge now bore none. Their flaps of skin danced on their waistline. Jorg was visibly at a loss of muscles as his body tore away at his legs and biceps, causing his fit frame to diminish, his abs showing but weaker than before, his thighs' width decreased by an inch. The boy looked as though he had lost 50 pounds of flesh. Endura had suffered as well, his cheeks no longer gaunt but now hollow, his mucus in his mouth dried up, his lips withered and chapped. Endura had suffered much the same as Jorg, but more so, as Jorg was reluctant to join the brawl, whereas Endura was the first man to engage, and the last one to stop. Their mentor never moved, but he always somehow knew where each boy was at any given time, and could tell exactly who had stopped running. Despite the darkness of the corners of the room, despite being behind him, without him ever moving, he knew. He knew exactly who to yell at to continue running, barking orders loud enough to vibrate the eardrums as his voice boomed and echoed in the room. No one dared say they couldn't continue after seeing the slaves' impoverished conditions. They would rather trudge on than become a tool to be abused daily. As the boys continued their workout running around the brass room, 10 buckets were placed at the altar in the center of the room, right in front of their mentor. The buckets were placed in pairs. One gray bucket held water. The other black bucket held light gray sludge.
"Stop! Form up here!"
The mentor boomed. All the boys lined up, almost instinctively forming lines with the 5 pair of buckets.
"Here's the sustenance your bodies need. Drink and eat. You will need it in order to grow strong."
The first 5 boys walked up, uncertain of what was before them. Being familiar with the water, they each drank from the gray bucket first. After drinking their fill, they proceeded to dip their hands into the black buckets, as they lacked utensils to eat, so their hands would have to do. Each boy was startled upon laying their tongues on the light gray sludge, as the sludge was tasteless. With the realization it's tasteless, the boys got comfortable, gorging themselves into the buckets. Finally, once the 5 boys were done, each stood up and walked off of the altar, their bellies distended from having so much food in so little time. It would take a few hours for their stomachs to process the amount of food they have consumed. The biggest of the lot was Crass, a young boy at the age of 11. He was the pudgiest of the group, and now, after eating, his belly increased almost double the size. He gazed hazily at the floor, his eyes half open. He lay down on the floor, slightly in the center of the room, but closer to the left wall. The next 5 got up and realized something. The black buckets were near empty. Jorg, being one of the 5 who witnessed the lacking bucket, gazed at the mentor.
There's not enough here for us. Can we get more? The water is fine.
No. We are not here to feed all of you. Only those who earn the right to feed. I must admit, though, your group surprised me. I thought the buckets would be tipped over from infighting, seeing as how one half of you were invading the other half's territory on your world down below. But instead you remained orderly and disciplined. A trait that is most admirable, but foolish to assume that treats will go your way just because you follow rules.
The children were in shock. The remaining boys who were in line gazed hateful stares at the first 5 who ate and gorged themselves upon the buckets, not even asking for the well-being of their fellows. Now, with all eyes upon this 5, Jorg takes the first move. He eats 4 handfuls of sludge, not much, but enough to stave off hunger, and takes 3 sips of water, barely making a dent in the sludge and water in his buckets. He looks at the line behind him and motions his hand for the next in line.
Come. The food is great. There's still plenty for all of us. Just share.
The boy next in line was Numid. He was a weasel, an underdog of a person, always aiming to be just atop the weakest and be out from the gaze of everyone else. He approaches the bucket, and in a slow act of energy exhaustion, slowly raises the bucket over his chin and pours the sludge down his mouth, taking in as much as he can handle. Jorg looked in fear. He didn't know what to do. Clearly, Numid needed the nutrition, but so too did the others. Numid suffered heavily from the fights, as he was one of the weaker kids, so the others ganged up on him, so that way they didn't risk getting hurt fighting one another. He was scared. What does he do? Take the food away from someone who needs it to be fair? Or allow him to drink up, but everyone would suffer pains of hunger? The indecision on his face gave way to trouble, in his line of 4 boys left.
Hey, stop him! He's eating the last of it,
said Bonnet, another child soldier who, along with Numid, was fighting to invade the village. The 4 boys rushed in, wrestling the bucket from Numid, kicking him in the side, forcing him to crash down off of the altar. Jorg was terrified, with fear and indecision. Now the people hate him, and now he has caused greater injury to an already wounded man. Endura couldn't help but chuckle, gaining the attention of the mentor.
What?
It's nothing. It's just amusing seeing Jorg's moral compass spin wildly.
Yes, such luxury isn't affordable here.
Turns to Jorg.
Where we are and what we must do, having such a warrior's morals won't serve you here.
Jorg slowly walks backwards, pressing his back into the wall and sliding down, burying his head into his arms and knees, terrified at the realization of the world he is now put in, where kith and kin hold no value, no binding unity to one another. Endura's turn had come for the bucket. He saw no sludge left, but the water bucket was still a quarter full. Endura rose the bucket and took a few gulps worth, much like Jorg, only taking in the sustenance needed. But his reasoning was much different. Unlike Jorg, Endura seeks to not become a target. Already he could see some of the boys darting looks at the first eaters. A cruel idea was brewing amongst them, and Endura did not want to be caught in it, but instead benefit from it, as he too held thoughts of immense cruelty towards those who ate majority of the food. Endura steps down from the altar, passing by the now huddled group of 3 boys, whispering to each other and gazing at Crass, as he was already in a deep sleep. Endura rested near the left wall, but slightly closer to the darker corner of the room, staying a decent gap from the center, but perfectly in line with Crass. The buckets were emptied. The slaves, the same ones who snatched the women with their black maces, came in. They picked up the buckets and started hand-washing the floor of the bloodstains in the center and dragging the 3 bodies that were there. The mentor finally stood up and addressed his new class.
Rest now. I will be back in the morning to continue your training.
As the mentor turned to leave, the lights turned off. The room went from a dark brass to a soft blue. The floor looked black, but the center still held a soft light. Not sure where that light was coming from, Endura and the other curious boys looked up. The light that was shining down on the room seemed slightly lit. The maintenance on the ship was well overdue, but the boys were thankful for this slight malfunction, as it allowed them some vision of the room. A rustling is heard. The light sleepers wake up from the noise, annoyed and curious as to who is wandering around at this time. Jorg and Endura gaze at what is happening. One boy stands up. He appears to be the one who is leading the other 2. He walks up to the deep, sleeping Crass. Walks around the boy and kneels down, waving at the other 2, whispering, "Come on." The other 2 follow, kneeling down with him. They gaze at Crass, his snoring and distended belly aggravating them just by looking. As they looked at him, the leader of the group whispers, "Hold him down." The 3rd boy, clearly having a look of uncertainty as his conscience tugs at him, "Are we sure? Can't we just wait for tomorrow? There will be more food." The leader looks up, angry. "No, we need to eat. If we don't eat, then we become weak. And the weak only live as servants or die. And this little bitch ate all the food in our bucket when he's weaker than everyone here." The 3 boys all agreed in silence. Now the room is slightly awake and paying close attention to what is going on. Jorg, again silent, but compelled to do something. Problem is that the food he ate wasn't enough. Those handfuls he took barely got rid of the pain, and now he's more tired than ever, helpless to watch what happens. Endura inches closer on his hands and knees like a cat, interested in what is happening with a hungry look in his eyes, playing out the scene before it has even happened. In one fell swoop, the 3 boys grab Crass, awakening him slightly as his eyes slightly part open. The first boy sinks his teeth into Crass's belly, pulling at his skin, not piercing, as he lacks the strength. The other boys follow suit with similar results, biting repeatedly, pulling his skin up. Crass is fully awake, screaming, flailing his legs and arms, trying to fight off the attackers, but to no avail. He was a deer caught in a lion's pride. Jorg musters the strength to stand. Leave him alone. No one else pays him any mind, not even Endura. Everyone gazes, and finally, after a few dozen times, the boys bite into Crass's stomach. A rip is seen. The leader of the group finally got a good grip on the damaged skin from repeated bites and ripped the skin off, revealing the distended abdominal muscles beneath. The other boys ripped the flesh too, eventually. Crass screams now turn bloody. His screaming rings the ears of all in the room. One of the boys punches his face to shut him up, as it's irritating the boy as he digs his teeth into Crass's flesh. The slops of skin stayed on the ground as the boys digged into Crass's muscles, eating out whole sections of muscle. Finally, the 3rd boy bites deep enough to expose the soft, smooth organs that lay underneath the abdominal walls. His massive arm-sized stomach, as smooth as marble, was exposed. The 2nd boy reached, his hands inside the cavity created from their bites, and pulls out the organ. He uses his teeth to rip the top of the stomach open, forming a small hole. From there, the boy lifts up the stomach, still connected to his intestines, and drinks from the opening, pushing out the sludge and bile from Crass's stomach and into his own. Crass passes out from the trauma, too great for anyone to bear. His breathing is stopped when the leader of the group pulls out a thin, flat muscle from the top of the abdomen. As the boys feast on their new kill, Enduro rises. He walks slowly but courageously, as a nobleman would walk amongst his peasants, his chin raised high, his walk steady. As he approaches the three boys and their new meal, the three boys gaze angry looks at Enduro, holding their kill from the pelvis and shoulders, making sure that the body won't be taken from them. Enduro slowly bends down, grabs Crass's foot, and yanks the leg hard. A pop can be heard from the pelvic region, and the flesh starts to separate bit by bit as Enduro starts leaning back, pulling the leg out from the carcass. The three boys continue their feasting once they realize what Enduro's goal was. Enduro secures the leg away from the body, leaving a trail of blood to where Enduro had originally decided to sleep. Feasting on the flesh of the thigh and calf, Enduro couldn't help but notice the strong metallic taste and the mess it was creating on his skin. Enduro and the three boys were soaked in blood. Jorg again crashed down in his arms, crying, but with no tears, only able to muster the sound of tears. Above the recruits, as they sleep, two Marines gaze down on them. One, their mentor, the other, highly decorated with full functioning armor that lacked any dents, breaks, and rust.
He will be a great addition to our forces. Is that so? And what if he doesn't let go of his need for revenge? He will. Replace his revenge with awe at the heraldry we provide. He will come around. He already despises the others, especially his own.
He will be a great Marine.